Hey everybody, this is HD. Welcome back. It is time for Daily Ladder number 21. I did miss the last 2 days, so I do have 2 daily ladders today, and I'll be doing a pro game tonight as well. If everything goes according to plan, which it should. I already have the games played, and it is going to be a Protoss game. So for once, finally, I will be playing a Protoss game. I know it's been quite some time. A lot of people have been wondering, HD, when are you going to start playing some Protoss? We really want to see you play some Protoss. I've been reading the comments, of course, down below, and a lot of players have wanted me to play the Race from Ire. So it is going to be me here as Pink Bunny, obviously playing on my alternate account. I will be the red Protoss here, and give me 1 second, let me adjust my resolution. There we go, everything looks a lot more clear to me now. I wasn't in HD before. So yeah, this is going to be a Protoss game, and it is a Protoss versus Zerg, which I don't think I've done any daily ladders of yet. I don't know if I've done any PVZs. I know for sure I've only done like 3 or 4 Protoss games total, just because Protoss, in my opinion, is like my absolute worst race, and I don't really want to show my worst race off, and then, you know, I'll be all embarrassed and sad and everything. So I did try to practice it a little bit, just to get it a little bit better. And right now I think I'm around mid-diamond, I'd say, with Protoss, maybe a little bit higher than mid-diamond. But yeah, this map is going to be on, yeah, what map is this? I always forget the maps. Metalopolis, that's what it's called. This is going to be on Metalopolis, which isn't the best map for Protoss versus Zerg, in my opinion. Obviously, because this map is so wide open, lots of expansions all over the place, and especially if your Zerg opponent spawns in the opposite side, which it looks like he did. You guys can see that Overlord came over from the 6 o'clock. So it looks like it is going to be a cross-spawn game, which does mean that this is going to be not the most favorable positions if you're a Protoss player, but nonetheless, I think we can try to eke out some strategy and some execution to overcome the terrain and the map disadvantage. Now, as you guys can see, I do have my gateways at the front of my ramp. Obviously, when you play Protoss versus Zerg, walling off is absolutely crucial. And the most easiest way to wall off against a Zerg player, very standard, very safe, you build your gateway at the corner of your ramp, and then you build your cybernetics core right next to it in such a way that it leaves one little opening where a Zealot can block it off. And then like that, you can pretty much prevent any Zerglings from running in, and just like that, you guys can see that's one little gap. It's just a little square unit, and it's going to prevent any Zerglings from running in once I block it off with the Zealot. So I'm also going to be a little, I'm also going to obviously scout with my probe. I didn't manage to block the hatchery, which I'm actually kind of shooting myself for right now. If you're ever Protoss, try to block the hatchery, you know, use a probe. You can block it off by building a pylon there. You can block it off by just being annoying and running the probe around in circles. I kind of missed my opportunity, and I allowed my opponent to get the hatchery down. But it's still okay. It's not like a big loss or anything like that. It's just one small thing that you can do if you're a Protoss player, and it helps just to keep the Zerg player's economy in check. Now, my strategy this game is going to be a very standard 3 warp gate into expansion build. This is pretty much the most solid Protoss build in the game right now. It's one of the best builds because it's safe. It allows you to get tons of warp gate units out, but not too many to the point where you're hurting your economy, and it allows you to secure your natural expansion very easily. Now, if this was a map like Lost Temple, or if it was a map like Steppes of War, I hesitate to say, any map with a closed off natural expansion, maybe like Shakuras Plateau, you can actually go for a 1 gate into Nexus instead of going 3 gate into Nexus, because you're able to wall off much easier. In fact, you can even go Forge into Nexus and just build cannons in the front. This map, not so much. You do actually need to go 3 warp gates first before you build your Nexus down. So as you guys can see, I'm just getting my 3rd warp gate out. Also using my Chrono Boost on my Cybernetics core. All the energy for Chrono Boost right now should be used on Cybernetics core because you want to get warp gate technology as soon as possible. This is absolutely crucial. It's probably the slowest upgrade in the game. I think it is the slowest upgrade. I don't think, maybe... I think Yamato Cannon might be slower. I might be wrong. I know somebody out there is going to go ahead and pull out the stats, go Google it, and then, you know, post it in the comments down below. But I know Warp Gate is a very slow upgrade. You should use your Chrono Boost on that. Make sure you get enough. Make sure you get that out as quickly as possible. And when you feel safe, grab your natural expansion. Now, the reason why I'm grabbing it with so little units is because I saw my opponent go for this very fast expansion. The Zerg player went for a natural expansion very quickly, so I feel like I'm safe going out and grabbing this Nexus a little bit earlier than one might think is safe. I mean, I'm counting on the fact that my opponent is not going to bum rush me. I think he's going to play a macro game. I saw that he went for a hatchery down. And obviously, if possible, use a scouting worker, send out a probe, send out something, just to make sure that he's not kind of bum rush you with anything. Just like that, my opponent sending in a Zergling, and he actually saw my Nexus, so now he knows what I'm doing. He knows I'm going for an economy-based game, and most likely, any good Zerg player here is just gonna start to mass pump drones. He realizes that there's no threat of an imminent Protoss attack. He knows that I'm building mass economy right now. And I'm not going to, most likely, I'm not going to push out and try to do anything because I'm worried about Zerglings running in or anything like that. So he's probably going to be building mass drones. Now, I guess right now is a time when you want to get that second gas running. You want to start to throw down a couple more warp gates. As soon as your Nexus finishes, you do want to get about 2 more warp gates. So as you guys can see, there's 2 more building. 1 at my natural and 1 inside my main. And eventually you want to get up to 6 warp gates. The natural transition from going 3 warp gate into Nexus is getting 6 warp gates. And eventually you're going to have to choose your strategy. What units do you want to go for? I've decided this game to go for the very popular Blink Stalker build. It's extremely potent, very powerful. You get your Twilight Council down after your 5th or 6th warp gate, and then you just start investing into mass stalkers and getting blink technology. And the reason for this is because blink stalkers are fairly good against almost every unit that the Zerg player can field except for Hydralisks. Mass blink stalkers are pretty good against speedlings if you keep them balled up. Mass blink stalkers are great against roaches, great against mutas, and so they're very, very good at this level of the game. Also, you want to make sure that when you go for mass blink stalkers, you do have pylons placed all over the map. You want to be able to control the map by warping in units wherever you need to. So as you guys can see, I'm sending probes out to throw pylons across the map, and I'm also pushing out right now. Reasoning for this is because my opponent needs to eventually be kept in check. He's probably building mass drones right now. Eventually you do want to push out and try to make something happen. And obviously if my opponent tries to do a run by with Zerglings, I can warp in a Zealot to block off the ramp. I can warp in sentries to force field. So it's very safe. It's not all in or anything like that. And it looks like my opponent has actually got a pretty large number of roaches out across the map. So that right there reveals to me the technology he's going for. This basically all goes to the basics of pushing out, finding out what units your opponents are going for, how much drones he's got, things like that. So I realized he's got a ton of roaches, and he's actually got more roaches than I'm comfortable with. So I'm actually going to throw up a couple of cannons at my front door here, and I'm also going to warp in more and more stalkers. In fact, it's kind of nice that he went for roaches because blink stalkers obviously very, very good against roaches. Stalkers in general are a good counter to roaches, and when you have the blink added in as well, you can micro very, very easily. So here we go. My opponent is going to push in with what seems to be a very large army of roaches. My cannon's just warping in time. And here's where you have to hold off. This is absolutely essential, and you want to find the best area to attack. That force field, not the best, but thankfully my two cannons combined with my army should just barely be enough to hold off this early roach aggression from my opponent. Do note, I also have +1 weapons being chrono boosted as well. One of the most important things about going for this blink stalker build, besides making sure you have pylons everywhere, is making sure you get your +1 and +2 weapons upgrade as quickly as possible. These upgrades are absolutely essential for the stalker. So here we go, another attack. I'm going to try to block off the roaches by force fielding, but my opponent actually has burrow here. And I realize, oh crap, he has burrow. I'm going to need to throw robotics facility down. I'm going to need to get observers, and eventually maybe even get a couple of mortals. So the robotics facility here is a good transition to dealing with this mass roach strategy, which I do have to say a lot of Protoss players seem to have a lot of problem with. Mass roaches, which are seemingly the unit of choice in Zerg versus Protoss, and a lot of Protoss players in the low diamonds and below actually fall victim and prey to roaches, because let's face it, roaches are very cheap, they're very effective, they do a lot of damage, they have a lot of health. Protoss players find a lot of troubles dealing with that. So this is one strategy that obviously can work very, very well against mass roaches, is mass blink stalkers with plus upgrades, and obviously going for that early expansion. So here we go, just continuing to invest my minerals, and it's very easy to warp in units. Obviously, you just push W, and then that selects all your warp gates. It's a free hotkey for Protoss, and then you just make a bunch of units wherever you want. Now, it looks like my opponent actually had burrowed roaches there, so he was trying to trap my stalkers, but thankfully I got my stalkers out of the way before any of them went down. And the thing here that I'm trying to do is grab my third expansion. I don't want to be stuck without a third expo, especially since the Zerg right now probably has a gold hatchery going up somewhere, maybe even a fourth or some auxiliary hatchery somewhere. One thing I do have to fault myself for right now while I'm watching this game as it's being played out is not scouting enough. I'm not sending out pylons across the map. I'm not sending observers out. I should be scouting my opponent and figuring out what expansions he's got up and coming right now. So that's one thing that hopefully you guys will be able to do when you guys play Protoss. And you know, just incorporate that as you're playing, as you're executing your units. Send out an observer, figure out what's going on, send out a zealot, make proxy pylons across the map. It's very useful. In fact, that's exactly what I'm trying to do here, is make some pylons. But my opponent, with his super uber roach army, just killed off that pylon pretty quickly. But eventually you do want to push out. If you have a large army of stalkers like this, they're very mobile, they're very quick. And one thing you can do that's very neat with the observer is the shift Q blink strategy. So here I'm actually going to shift Q blink my stalkers into my opponent's main. To do this, it does take a little bit of practice, but what you want to do is hold shift, right click where you want the stalkers to glow, and then you want to right click again and blink into your opponent's main. So here you guys saw the shift Q blink micro. I'm waiting for the cooldown to wear off, and then I can blink my stalkers out of there. Doesn't look like that was very effective. Maybe killed off the Hydralisk Den, I think. And I think I lost maybe 5 or 6 stalkers. So that obviously not the most effective use of the mobility of the stalkers going in and being aggressive. But nevertheless, it does keep my opponent on the back foot. He's scared. He knows Blink is out on the map now. And one thing that revealed to me was the large number of Hydralisks my opponent has. So to deal with this, I like to go for Templar. A lot of Protoss players go for Colossus when they deal with mass Hydralisks, and that's fine. Colossus are obviously a very powerful unit. They're very good against Hydralisks, but I actually like to go for Templars. I like to invest my gas into Templars. I feel like I'm better with my Templars than I am with my Colossus micro, and I feel like Templars complement Stalkers much better than Colossus do. Don't ask me why. It's kind of just my feeling, the way I like to play. So I am going to go ahead and get my Templar Archives Chrono Boost the upgrades as quickly as possible. You want both upgrades. You want the Khaidarian Amulet, and you obviously want the Psystorm. So it looks like my opponent still got his Roach army just outside of my main and my natural and my third expansion. And obviously it's very important here as a Protoss player, make sure you defend this third expo. Keeping that third expo obviously means that the Zerg has to have 4 expansions in order to remain even. So it's kind of nice here to have that blink mobility with those stalkers. And right now I am starting to warp in those high gas intensive units, the High Templar, which are really going to help me when it comes down to the Storm. When I need to use them against the Hydras, Stalkers are going to be used against Roaches, Psionic Storm going to be used against the Hydralisk. So that's where the composition really comes into a nice mixture of its own, deals with Roach Hydra very easily. And obviously you can swap in Templar for Colossus if you want to. It doesn't really need to be Templars like I said, but I do prefer Templars. So here we go. Here comes the next big engagement. It is Roaches and Hydras, and right now I'm just looking for nice spots to lay down my Storm, waiting for his army to position itself, and then I'm going to, I guess I have one force field still left over, maybe 2 force fields. I don't really have that many sentries because most of my gas is going towards Templars here, but I am dropping the Storm whenever possible. And when your opponent's in retreat, great time to go ahead and use that blink and take out the entirety of your opponent's army. So they're taking out the majority of those Roaches and Hydras, going back to base, using Chrono Boost when necessary on my upgrades, and obviously getting this gold expansion up as well. So things are looking pretty darn good for me here as my Stalkers start to push forward on the other side of my opponent's map. Now, one thing that you guys should remember is Chrono Boost is a very nice ability to have. It's pretty much like the Inject Larva for Zerg. You want to use Chrono Boost whenever possible on your warp gates. It's kind of the macro mechanic for the Protoss. Very, very important. Here comes the next big engagement, but my opponent actually has a ton of Roaches and Hydras. A lot of Hydras, actually. And this is where I realized, wow, I'm going to have to fall back. I guess my opponent was able to get a lot more bases than I originally thought he had, and that really came down to me not scouting my opponent. Right now all I really see is the main and the natural, and I haven't even really scouted the 3rd, 4th, or 5th bases. So as for this map, like I said before in the beginning, Metalopolis not the best map for Protoss versus Zerg because the Zerg can expand to so many different locations, and it really does become a situation of you don't want to get into a macro war against Zerg, so you really want to make sure to harass whenever possible and not allow your opponent to build up a super large economy. So as you guys can see, continuing to warp in these Stalkers, holding on to my gold expansion. Looks like there's going to be another battle here. My opponent has a ton of Roaches and Hydras, a lot of Roaches actually. So yeah, actually there's a lot of Hydras in the back, but look at this. If he's going to clump up on that ramp, that's a beautiful spot to throw down the Psy Storms and annihilate the Roaches and Hydras. You guys can see the corpses of the Roaches and the Hydralisks just bleeding into the ground below after the Sonic Storm gets laid down. And continuing to warp in the Templars. What you want to do is warp the Templars in behind your Stalker army, which I actually don't have any pylon power nearby, so throw a couple of pylons up. That's where having pylons around the map really does come in handy. And it just goes to show that +2 weapons, I think maybe my Stalkers might be close to +3 here, really makes them extremely powerful and potent against the Roaches. I'm going to push forward, but I want to make sure I can check out for the gold expansion here. If my opponent does indeed have a gold, you want to take that out. You don't want to allow your opponent, as I said before, to macro a bunch of bases up. You want to take them out whenever you have the advantage. And back home, this is where the Chrono Boost comes in handy, spamming Chrono Boost over your warp gates. This is something I wasn't doing earlier on, and I really want to emphasize here because Chrono Boosting warp gates makes a huge difference in the ability for your forces to macro, because when you Chrono Boost a warp gate, what it does is it makes the cooldown for the warp gate 50% faster. I believe 50% is right for Chrono Boost. It makes it 50% faster, which means you can warp in that much quicker, and you can get more reinforcements on the battlefield in a less amount of time. So you get quicker cycles to warp in more units. And as you guys can see, my army here is nearing max, warping in units to get to that maximum supply, and obviously using that Chrono Boost, those Chrono Boosted warp gates to help my cooldown time and at reaching the 200 mark as quickly as possible. So, I'm still continuing to just macro at this point. I have good map control. It looks like I'm going to go ahead and explore the south side of the map, the other side of the map, but my opponent is actually pushed forward with his massive Roach army here, and so I'm going to have to bring back everything and defend this, but unfortunately Roaches with their high potent DPS able to take out the Nexus very easily. And that's really the threat, the danger that Protoss deals with. Sometimes, if your army is all the way on the other side of the map, it's best just to go for a base trade. Let him take out your Nexus, and then you can go and take out a hatchery or two with your army. In that situation, I felt like I could fall. I was able to fall back and defend in time. Didn't really work out as well as I hoped it would, but that's alright. I still feel like I've got a huge army advantage. My opponent's using his burrow ability to regenerate the Roach's health. But here we go, next big engagement. Obviously dropping the Psy Storms over those Roaches, and that forces him to flee and run away from the Sonic Storm. But I've got plenty more energy where that came from. Go ahead and drop it on the Roaches and take down that Roach HP. And as you guys can see, I've actually got a small auxiliary army on the 2 o'clock position, which is attacking right now. And I'm using that pylon right there in my main to warp down below. I've actually discovered the other expansions where my opponent has been building up his large economy. And this is what you want to do at the high level. You want to multi-prong attack, because this forces your opponent to divide his attention. He has to build defensive units over there to defend those Stalkers, and he has to deal with the major battle at his natural expansion as well. So this all really adds more and more pressure to your opponent, and all the while obviously building up more probes, saturating my gold and my 4th expansions. And yeah, this is pretty much late game PvZ. This is how you do the 6 warp gates after Expo mass blink stalker. It's a very potent strategy. One thing that you guys might want to do more is making these multi-prong attacks count early on in the game. You don't want to move with one massive army, as a lot of Protoss often do. They just kind of ball up their army and go around with it. You want to split your army up and harass. It looks like right here my opponent's actually going to be able to deflect me and maybe even kill off the rest of my Stalkers, so he's still got a ton of Roaches in the bank. So this game's not exactly over yet. I'm gonna actually, once again, fall back to my main macro, use that mass Chrono Boost with all my energy saved up from my Nexus to re-establish my army. And it looks like my main army was actually destroyed there, as you guys can see, but that's okay, because these stalkers over here that were originally harassing still alive, still doing good damage. I'm actually going to be able to pick off that last roach that was coming out, and I think I should be able to kill off this hatchery as well, which everything, like I said before, comes when it comes down to it, every little advantage helps, and picking off a hatchery against a Zerg is a huge advantage. It looks like my opponent is pulling up his roaches once again, but I'm going to go ahead and use the Shift Q Blink strat to pull the rest of my stalkers away. It's like they pretty much walk over the ramp just like a Colossus does. I just realized that. And really, that's one thing that if you guys are gonna play Blink Stalkers, learn that strategy. Learn how to Shift Q Blink. I actually have a tutorial video about it on my channel. If you guys dig around, I think if you guys go through the search menu and type in Shift Q Blink or something like that, it should come up. And I teach you guys how to do that strategy. Very important if you're gonna go with mass Blink Stalkers. And it looks like here, this is the rest of my opponent's Roach army. Not too much left over behind. I've still got the huge advantage of Stalkers that I had before because of my Chrono Boosted Warp Gates, and my opponent Arrow is gonna go ahead and GG out of that. So that was a long-term macro PvZ, one that I usually don't get into. Most of my Protoss games are either they get shut out in the beginning or I win early on with some kind of 4-gate or some weird strategy. But that was actually a really long-term PvZ. And I hope you guys enjoyed that broadcast. My opponent in the Diamond rank, my alternate account still in the Diamond as well. And tonight I'm going to have another Daily Ladder as well as a pro game coming out. So I hope you guys stay tuned for that. And that's it for me. HD,